Thank you. So again, my name is Elana Olson. I hope you guys have been having a great day so far and enjoying all the different talks that you've been hearing today. Today I'm going to talk about how you as developers can find Angular more easily, how you can access your resources, how you can build applications faster. And so most people here today already know Angular. Some are experts, some are just beginning, but everyone is in a different place on their learning journey. We're all just boats sailing in the sea. We have different knowledge ranges. Knowledge is often specialized. Even people on the Angular team have stuff to learn about the Angular platform. And at some point, you'll be called upon to teach others, to teach your coworkers Angular. As you guys grow and expand, you'll get more people, and as you had to once learn Angular, you'll have to teach someone else. So it's important for us to understand how we can quickly get started. Today, I want to talk about who this talk is really most useful for. If you are learning Angular for the very first time, this talk is going to be great. If you're going to be teaching someone, which is basically everybody here today, about Angular, this talk will also help you. If you're searching for the best practices, or you want to be able to find resources faster, this talk is really going to be useful. We're going to cover three main things. First, we're going to actually create an Angular application from nothing to deployment. Then we're going to be able to find resources more easily and expand your application with these libraries and other Angular resources. And finally, we'll go over how you can contribute to the Angular world, what you might want to do with your team, or how you want to help this effort. So I work as a developer relations individual on the Angular team. That means that I'm talking with developers, understanding your experiences and your needs, and translating that into tools, documentation, and prototypes that will help you directly from your feedback. I study software engineering. I love traveling. That's why I'm here today, and also to share with you guys about Angular. And in my spare time, I like to play lots of volleyball. So let's get into how we can create an Angular application from nothing to deployment. We see here's a flow diagram of exactly what needs to happen when you're creating an Angular application. You first are going to set up your development environment. Whether you choose to prolong or put off the development environment setup and just start using StackBlitz, which allows you to immediately start building, or if you want to set up your CLI, which involves downloading Node.js, installing Angular CLI, and choosing a package manager. Then we move into your building, which you're going to start using components, and you'll be able to start navigating through different views with your single-page application. You'll then start managing data and taking in user data, compiling your project, and finally deploying it. You have an application. So the first step of this Getting Started guide is setting up your development environment. And as I said, StackBlitz is a really great way of getting very quickly into programming Angular. You don't have to do all of this back-end stuff, and instead you can just make your application and then build it locally at the end. But if you're like me, where you wanted to be able to build it from the start and have your setup environment ready for any application, then I wanted to learn all the steps necessary. So to build locally, you first need to install Node. You can install what's called NVM, or Node Version Manager, if you want to have lots of different Node versions for different projects. That way, on this one project, I can use Node version 8, and on another project, I can use Node version 10. And you can switch really easily, but this is an optional requirement. Then you're going to install a package manager. Whether you choose to use NPM or Yarn, both of these will help you install all of your dependencies for your project. You'll install the Angular CLI, and then you're going to create your application for the very first time with ng-new. And for our example application, we're going to call it a fish app because of the theme. You're going to open that directory, and then you're going to serve it. And you have this application. And it should look something like this. Everyone's very first application before they've added any code to their project will look like this. You can actually learn more information about how to build projects from your opening page. But we want to add our own code. So let's get to the building step. Now, when we're building an Angular application, we're going to start using components. And components are really useful because they help divide our entire screen into view sections so that we're creating one component that we can actually duplicate across views. We can create components really easily with ng-generate component and then the component name. And when we do that command, it actually imports it into the Angular CLI and then adds that component name into your declarations array in app modules, which I'll show very shortly. Let's take a look at what our beginning application might look like. So we have some fish profiles, and each fish profile is a component. And when we create that fish profile component, every component is given a selector, a template URL, and a styles URL. Now, the selector allows us to take that component in brackets and put it in any HTML file and say, OK, we want this component here, and we want this component here, so we can duplicate it over and over again in different views. The template URL helps us define the HTML that's associated with that component. And the styles URL also helps us associate the styles with that single component. So every component has a TypeScript file, an HTML file, a CSS file, and a spec.ts for your tests. Now, like I said, when we create that component, we're actually changing the app module. You import it, when you do ng-generate, it automatically imports that component name, which was fish profile component, and adds it to our declarations array so that your entire application is now aware of that new component. Let's break down the original screen into our different components. Here we actually have two different components. The first is the toolbar, and the second is the fish profile. Now, the fish profile is actually comprised of a ton of Angular material components, which I'll go into very shortly. Angular material is a great way for creating and adding components that are already pre-built and follow material design practices. Material components, they implement and they follow common patterns so that you don't have to build standard lists and tables and navigation bars. They're already ready for you. So one example of an Angular component is called matcard. Matcard, an Angular material component, sorry, is called as matcard. And matcard has a matcard header, it has matcard content, and this way I can put a matcard inside my component and have predefined components already in my application. Now this matcard is comprised of your matcard header and your matcard content. And all I had to do is include matcard in those specific headers and content, and it did it all for me. Angular material is really great for speeding up that process of just creating components really quickly and standardizing them with material design. Did you notice the directive that I slipped in that code? Here it is. Directives allow us to do interesting things to our code. In this example, we have an array called fishies, and for every fish, we iterate over it, and we produce a matcard. And so I had a puffer fish, and I had an angelfish, and lots of other fish, and every single one of those fish had their own profile duplicated in a list. So we've created components for our application, and now we want to be able to have lots of pages. We want to make a single page application. The way that looks is here I've created a menu, and we actually have different pages that we will navigate to that will have unique URLs. So the first thing you need to do is to go into your app modules and import router module. Then you define paths to get to different applications, different pages in your application. So our home page, which is the empty brackets, is our fish profile components. And then we have another page called FishCam, which actually links to a different Angular component that displays a live fish recording. And then we are going to add router links into our menu that we've defined. so that we can link to our home, we can link to FishCam anywhere in our application. So let's rewind a little quickly back. We can see here now we have our home page and we have our live FishCam page. These are our two router paths so far. So our next step is to be able to actually manage all the data. We're not just going to be storing things in arrays. We're probably going to have a database or an API that we want to import data from. And that's where services come in handy. Services will contact your HTTP client, and they will interact with an external API or database. And they will do queries for you, and then all the data that's coming through will go through your service and then injecting into your components, so that any data shared across components is provided by your service. Services are great because they help you fetch data, specifically data that is used across all components. And that data is protected and it's simply put into one area, which makes it very easy to know where your data should be stored and where it's coming from. In every component, you'll just inject the service, and then you have access to that shared data. You'll use the simple command of ng generate service and then the service name that you want to use. And that will do lots of things, like import injectable and create a service. And that way, in this simple example, we're just using an array of data, but we would normally be connecting to Firebase or something like that and adding data or getting data. And then, when we go to a component, we import that service and we inject it into the component so that we can get or add data via that component. And it's not data that's specific to the component, but it's data specific to your entire application. Now let's talk about forms. You have all of this amazing single-page application, and you want to be able to now take in user input. Forms help you capture and validate user input. The way that they do that is you can add specific validators to every single input to make it required or to have certain form requirements. So if you're adding an email, you want to make sure that it's an OK email to import. And you can track these input changes. So let's take a look at what a form would look like. If I want to have more fish profiles, I want to ask people to submit these new fish profiles. So we're going to take in a name, we're going to take in a description, and we'll take in an image URL to be able to display those fish profiles. We're going to be using reactive forms in this example. And so what we want to do is import form group, form control, and validators. And that way, we can have a form group that is a group of lots of form controls. And each of those form controls is the name, the description, and the image URL. Then in your code, you define an Angular form and attach that form group name. And then you'll also have in each input with a material form field, you'll have the form control name. And that way, any input that you're given in that form, you can then add to a submission in your database. You're collecting new data. Finally, you need to import certain things into your app module, like reactive modules. We also use material form fields. And when you use material form fields, you need to also import mat input module. So we're now at our last step. We can deploy. And there's lots of different ways that you can deploy your application. A common way to use is Firebase. And there are lots of steps provided on the angular.io getting started page to help you understand how you can deploy on Firebase. When you have an Angular application and you're using Firebase, you're going to want to go through Angular Fire, which is a specific way of using Firebase in conjunction with Angular. So let's do a demonstration of this application now that we've built it. It's a very simple application, but you can see here we have all of these different profiles that we have created. We have these different router links. So we have a home, we have a new fish profile where we can add a submission, and then we have this live fish cam that links to, I think, the longest standing video on the World Wide Web ever, and it's just some aquarium in someone's house. Or their office, maybe. You sometimes see people walk behind it, but this is completely accessible, and we've just linked to it, and that's a whole new page we have. Obviously, your application isn't going to be as silly as this, but this is the base for all Angular applications, is that you're going to have components, which in this case, we have fish profiles, we have a submission component, we have a fish cam component, and you will have routers so that you can route to different paths on your application. You'll have input, so you're going to want to use forms, and you will always want to use services when you're using data that's shared across components. So we're kind of pros now at Angular because we know how to build applications and do all these crazy things. We can use components, we can have single-page applications, we're balancing with everything, and you can build a way better application than what I've shared today that's way more complex, but it's really based on this foundation. So when we have this application, and you're already pros now, you want to be able to find resources a lot more easily. And in order to do that, you have to trust those resources and go through a vetting process so that you can understand what's good for your application, what fits, where do you find these resources. And so we created an application called Angular Ecosystem that compiles all of the best practices today of libraries and Angular tooling, Angular resources, and allows you to compare them really quickly based on bundle size, based on Angular compatibility, and based on accessibility in terms of good documentation, frequent maintenance. We want to be able to speed up your integration with different tooling so that you can rapidly expand your application. It's not just the fish app, but it's a fish app with a really cool library that's installed, and it's a fish app built with the best practices in mind. Let's take a look at what this Angular ecosystem actually looks like. So if we go here and we want to search for something like, let's just say UI for now. Generally UI, we don't really know what we want. We come up with a huge list of information on different UI. So here we have Angular material. And we're provided with links, a really short description in this case, but often they have longer descriptions. And we can see here with like Angular Playground, it supports ng-add. And this is what we call Angular compatibility or Angular features. If it supports ng-add or ng-update, it means that it can integrate with your Angular application really easily. And they built that in mind for this. It provides you with lots of helpful links, and eventually it'll actually be measuring bundle size based on a bundle size measurement tool, where you can see what the very base and like bare bones model of that integration would be into your application, and then add up those numbers and see how big it would expand your application. So let's say you've browsed through this list, but you're not really happy with your results. You can actually submit a new resource. If you think that you have a fantastic new resource, or you know of one, or you're building one and you think it should be on this list so that everyone can start using it, this is where you can actually add a submission. So there's some standards for how we want to approve new applications, and they will be passed across the Angular team. So the current applications that are on this recommendation have been pulled directly from the Angular documentation and from teams that we've already vetted, essentially. But we're looking for certain things that are common across tons of applications, as well as libraries and other useful tools and resources. So let's just say, I don't know, we want to make a fish app, and it's of type fish, and it has some crazy description, some related search terms like fish and application, UI. We are going to add, for now it's just going to be localhost, a funny URL. Let's say it's the same as the Git repository, doesn't have an NPM package, and for now let's just say it supports ng-add. So we submit that application, and we're given a status to go to. And so when that status is changed, it means that your application has either been approved or denied. And so as an admin, I can sign, I'm actually already signed in, and now I see this fish app. It's been submitted, as well as some other applications, and I can go in and review it. and say, this description's not so great, maybe we should expand upon it, or I know that this application actually doesn't support ng update, or it does. And so then I will go in and, for now, we're just going to not approve or deny anything. But then we can go and see all the applications and everything that's already in this database and browse through it. So if you don't really know what you're looking for, you just kind of want to expand your application, you can go through and look at everything, read their descriptions, and kind of understand what we're looking for in this database of information. Okay. And that way you can search very easily and compare all the tools very quickly. Done the demo. So in conjunction with everything that I've already shared now, let's talk about the component structure of how this application, which Angular ecosystem was actually built with. So we have our app component, and we have about 9 other components, and they're all related to the service in some way. So when we type a search entry, we're typing in the search bar, and that goes to your service and says, hey, I want to query the database for this search entry, matching with the search terms or the title or the category. And then that service returns values into our results list component. And the results list component provides all of the information in that table that we were comparing. And at the very bottom, you can add a new submission, which will bring you to your submission status. All of these are unique components. And I could copy this new submission anywhere in the application and have lots of duplicates if I wanted people to submit a new application on every single page. And then we look all the way over into the admin console, and we actually see that the admin console contains another component. And that way, I could have specific URLs designated to each submission, so that the admin console is kind of a shell, and each submission that we have gets inputted into that admin console and fills it out. And so you'd have admin console / the submission ID, and it would change each submission you have. Let's take a look at this admin console. So you can see it visually now. We have the admin console, and then inside it is that submission. And we break it down a little further, and we see that the admin console is actually comprised of a ton of material components. Crazy idea. Those components are already built for me, so why shouldn't I just use them? They're really easy to import. You just import them, and then you put them anywhere in any of your components, and you're good. So we have this side navigation to scroll through all of our resources. We have our material card. We have another Angular form. And we have some material radio buttons. All of these are pre-built components that I really like to use because they're super easy to use. So I talked a lot about submitting a new resource, and I want the community to be able to expand this application. So what are the criteria for approval? Good documentation is always a great start. We have to be able to understand our application before we can do anything with it. Frequent maintenance is also important, and if you can provide simple integration with other tools, that would be really great. On the technical side, if you have NPM packaging, it's really easy to install your tool. If you support these ng features, which is ng add, ng update, if you have a small bundle size, which you can actually go to the bundle measurement tool that will be released soon and measure your application and then self-report it. That can help us understand how big your application would be if people started integrating it. And if you have automated tests. So how can we be part of the ecosystem? Please submit resources. We won't know about your application unless you tell us. And we want to accept as many applications as possible because there's so many great tools that everyone is building. And it's really great when we can integrate them with the entire Angular ecosystem. Help us establish more criteria for comparing resources. So if I missed something here today, and you were like, dang, this is a really great way to compare stuff, and she's just really missing it, send me a message on Twitter. I think my Twitter's on every single slide. And you can help us define better criteria. And if you want to expand this application and be a contributor, that would be really beneficial for the entire Angular team and for me. So if you can submit a PR, that would also be great. Here are the links in order to access NG Ecosystem. It's live on this crazy weird URL. And if you want to go to the GitHub link, it's mygithub/NG Ecosystem for adding new criteria, if you want to message with some issues, if you want to submit a PR, or you have some crazy idea about expanding it. Send us a message there. Thank you very much. If you want access to these slides, it's found here. It has all these useful links that I've talked about today, as well as the step-by-step process of getting started with your application. Thank you so much. Have a great day.